Everyone. So I noticed that a lot of you have had trouble with this literature synthesis. So I wanted to make a quick video because I made this so it would be helpful for you, not and so you could understand how to extract information from articles. It wasn't meant to confuse anyone, and I wasn't sure it would actually. So I wanted to go over kind of the examples that I put up just so you guys can see kind of what I really wanted you to get from it, what the point was. Okay, so at the top here you have a bunch of different things that I wanted you to try to get out of the article. Sometimes these aren't going to be as evident, and sometimes it won't be as you won't even necessarily need to pull that much out. But if you're going to be using the article to support anything in your paper, then it would be really good to pull that information out that you need. So sometimes an article might have, 10 studies in it, which it becomes ridiculous sometimes when they keep, oh, experiment 1, experiment 2, experiment 3, experiment 4, and so on. So it becomes really difficult to do something like this, which in that case you could actually just make if there are 4 studies, you could make 4 different entries on here and discuss each one of those studies, which some of the information would be repeated, like a theoretical framework is likely going to be repeated, but the hypotheses will be different depending on the study. The sample is probably going to be different because they're going to be doing different studies, but sometimes they might run different types of studies on the same sample. So that just depends. But you could have 4 different entries from one article if there are 4 different studies. Um, so that might help somewhat because they might find a pattern as they're studying 4 different times. Does that make sense? Um, but basically, I wanted you to pull out the citation because it would be easier for you to take that and put it into your reference page. Um, I just put APA citation. Sometimes it's difficult to put it in APA format. That's fine. Just put the information down that you need in the order that you need it, and then you can adjust the format when you put it in your paper. Now, the theoretical framework, I think I've mentioned this before, but the theoretical framework is going to be in the literature review, and it's basically just going to talk about where the study's coming from. Like, are they posing the study based on self-determination theory? Are they using, like here I have expectancy value theory, and here's another one on self-determination theory. Okay, so they'll likely talk about these specific frameworks, these specific theories, and where they're posing their question from. Okay, they're not going to just have a general idea typically, like, oh, we're just going to talk about um, procrastination and stress, and that's it. They're going to come from somewhere, like some sort of background, some sort of theory to pose their question from. Okay, and then their research questions and hypothesis should be pretty clear. It'll come before the methods. It should come pretty close to the beginning of the methods, but it will be in the literature review right at the end. So it'll talk about the research question. It should pose hypotheses. It might not. May just talk about a question. It may just mention hypotheses. It may not specifically say a question easily, this is our question, this is our hypothesis. But you should get a general idea when they talk about right before there what they're expecting to happen in their study. And that would be their hypothesis, okay? And so that would go here. This might be harder for you to pick out, but it's good for you to try to find this. Typically they'll state it pretty plainly, but you know how sometimes it's very difficult to read academic articles, and I understand that. But this should be really easy to pick out. If it's not, there's probably a problem with the article itself. The sample, they should be telling you how many people are in the sample. They should give you an idea of, is this sample from the US? Is it from Japan? Is it from China? Is it from Korea? Um, there should be um, specific characteristics mentioned so you know which groups have been studied, because the findings might be different based upon the groups, and that might be a reason for somebody to study group differences. So let's say that this says mostly white. Let's say that another one was mostly African American. So then that might be a good basis for you to say, well, it sounds like there could be ethnic differences, and then you could go and study that. I hope that makes sense to everyone. Um, the measures used is actually going to be in the methods section, and it's going to talk about, like, so you have these variables that you mentioned somewhere in your hypothesis. So this is what is used to measure these variables. For example, I like to study about interest, and there might be a specific scale on interest that I put here. So MSLQ is a big motivation scale. So this might be something to look at. If I actually wanted to go and do a new study, this would be something to look at. But this isn't as important for you guys, but it's kind of important to know, did they just use a one-item scale? Did they use a larger scale? I hope that makes sense, because a more validated scale gives you more evidence, gives you a better evidence, better quality evidence to make your claims from. So the procedure, and this is something that you guys will have to write in your own papers. The procedure is, how is the information collected? How is the data collected in your sample? What exactly did you do? What were the steps? I didn't put any here because this is all made up. I just made these things up just so you guys would understand where we're going with this. You only needed to do one. And your only information on this, the literature matrix 1, would be this information up at the top. All right? You wouldn't need, unless you had several studies, you wouldn't necessarily need to do any kind of synthesis at all for this information so far. Was this experimental or correlational? So this is good to know because you would know what kind of evidence you have. Okay, so experiment is in a laboratory. It's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have as good like external validity, so generalization, and because it's in a laboratory setting. However, it does have a causal basis. So an experiment controls for all these variables that something within like a natural setting would not be able to control for. So that kind of gives you an idea of, okay, if this is an experimental study, then, you know, you look at it, you make sure that there's all these things that are controlled for. You say, oh, this is pretty solid evidence that there's a causal, the causal claim here. And for correlational is really good to find relationships. So it's important to consider correlational evidence as well as experimental evidence. But you guys might have, like, you might have one study in your in this article that's an experiment and one that's correlational, and that's fine. You could put two different entries here if you like, or you just put the one that's actually you're going to draw from for your paper. So let's say findings of the experiment showed something that is relevant to your paper, but findings from the correlation really didn't. Just don't include it. Just include the one that's going to be relevant to what you're studying, okay? So, and the findings are just just how it sounds. They're what they found. What did their evidence show? What did the statistics suggest? So that goes here. And then your notes and takeaway, this is for you to write anything that you want to. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll be reading the article and I'll find something within the literature review part. And I think, wow, that's a really good citation. I really need to find that. So I will put that here, and it will help me find more relevant articles that I can use to add to my matrix. So there might be all kinds of different notes that you have here. This is purely what your thoughts as you're going through the article. So that's really up at your discretion to use. But these things should be, I mean, I know it's not extremely easy to find and to figure out exactly what you need, but they're just kind of pulling parts out of an article, okay? So once you have, like I have several here, and I just, like I said, I made these up. This isn't, none of this is like real. So whenever I look at this though, I would say, oh, okay, they found this, they found this, they found this. So what does this mean? What are the patterns? So motivation seems to be associated with higher achievement. Well, that makes sense. And feeling competent seems to be a factor that spans a lot of different theories. Okay, so it's pretty, that might be a pretty substantial thing to consider because it spans theories and it's been found in several studies. Now I think, okay, well, future research could expand on competency to find reasons why competence is such a strong factor. All right. So these are things that I wrote in down here. You may not have as much to write down here, and that's fine. This is more for your understanding of the article and to keep it organized. So, are most of the studies correlational or experimental? Well, maybe more experiments should be done. Okay, I have one experiment, two correlational studies, because correlation is not equal to causation. All right, so if I want to make a causal claim, maybe I should do an experiment here because there's only one that's been done before. So here I'm looking down this column. Oh, are there typical measures? Are they quantitative? Are the measures reliable? So I didn't put the reliability statistics here, but that would be like Cronbach's alpha. So they mention that where they talk about the measures in each article. So let's see, MSLQ, typically reliable, because I know this because I've studied motivation. So you might have to look at, okay, well, this measure, does it mention reliability statistics? If the reliability is 0.7 or above, is 0.7 to 0.79 is adequate. 0.8 is pretty decent. 0.9 is really good. So 0.9 or above, right? So the higher the Cronbach's alpha, the better. You don't want anything, if it's lower than that, then the measures really weren't that reliable in the study, and it may hurt the validity of the study, okay? So maybe I should consider other measures because although the MSLQ is used, you know, most often, I consider other measures to add to it. Is there anything, then I might, if I were going to do a research project, I might look at the MSLQ and look at the measure that they actually used for this, because it's a very large measure. There are lots of different subscales that people typically pull out. So I say, well, would I use this particular measure? Is there something, and when I look at the items, I might say, well, but they didn't talk about this other thing that I really want to know about. So then I might try to find a measure that's also reliable that I could use along with it. Okay? So again, this is more if I'm going to do a study on my own. So this part might not be as important to you, but it's really important that you understand these are important to pull out to understand if the study is reliable, if the study is valid. Okay, so if the measures that they used are not valid, then there might be a problem with the study, and the findings that they have, which you are going to use, may not be as good. Okay. Now, when I look at the samples, oh, there's cross-cultural, different ages, but fewer older people. So they're mostly females and mostly white, so maybe I can get a male sample with different ethnicities rather than mostly white. And maybe, probably I can get more of like older adults. Might be important to use, depending on my questions and what I'm interested in. Um, are there questions that have not been asked? So this is important because typically you'll not find a lot of repeat questions unless they're with other questions that are similar. But a lot of repeat questions because a lot of times there's not published research that will publish or journals that'll publish uh, articles that have already been done. They might publish something that has an additional um, component, but they won't publish replication studies because I'm not sure why. It should be because that's how science should be, but they don't necessarily do that. So typically you'll find questions posed differently, and that's good. But it's also you need to try to find patterns um, with findings. But is there something that hasn't been asked that I can ask? But for you guys, this synthesis part right here may not be as important because of the nature of this particular assignment, this particular class. You're already going to have data. It's not something that you have to ask because it's already been asked on your class survey. But this, for the future, is important for you to understand. You find patterns in these things as you're looking through multiple sources. And again, what theoretical frameworks? Okay, it mostly comes from this specific framework. Are there other theories I can add to it? Are there other theories that say something else that hasn't been studied? So I hope that helps. This assignment is not, like I said, it's not meant to be confusing. It's more meant to help you take an article and learn how to read it effectively, learn how to pull information out that you're going to be using to write your papers. You don't want to just go straight to the discussion and figure out what they found or just look at an abstract. You really need to decide as you're looking through it, is this study, is it a good study? Is it valid? Are there things that are in this that can show me that it's valid, like valid measures? Did they? Because if they, let's say they did a correlation, and this is good for you to understand the difference between correlation and experiment. Let's say they actually did a correlation, but when they mention their findings, they make a causal claim, like this causes that. Then you'll understand, okay, I gotta be careful. I can't really say that this causes that because they only did a correlational study. So even though their findings showed this strong relationship, the way they posed it in the discussion sounds like a causal claim. So you can't really say that it's causal. Even though they said it was causal, you can't say that because they only did a correlational design. So I hope that helps explain some things. I will post an announcement about this very soon. So I hope this wasn't too traumatizing for everyone, but I appreciate anybody who attempted this assignment. Um, we'll talk about the synthesis, and please let me know if you have any questions or concerns about it. I hope this helps.